He appealed for witnesses. Somebody must have seen the shooting. Was Jerry killed by a lone assassin, or were there more than one killer? A complete wall of silence was starting to form over Jerry Tobin's murder.
One of the difficulties we have dealing with motorcycle gangs of this type is that they are very reluctant to speak to us, very reluctant to assist us, even if the victim is one of their own.
Real Crimes did approach the Hells Angels for comment about Jerry, but they declined to take part in the programme.
The Hells Angels follow a kind of double track. On the one hand, they're very in your face, very flashy. They have web pages. They'll parade through a town during the Bulldog Bash or other activities. So they have a very image conscious, very Hollywood way to present themselves. At the same time, they have this very strict code of silence where they almost always refuse to talk to journalists and they always refuse to talk to police. And that's part of their secretive nature.
And this was exactly what the investigators were starting to experience at the crime scene. The Warwickshire Police Force was met by a secretive world they did not understand.
The scene was difficult to manage in the immediate aftermath of Jerry having been shot. Clearly, mobile phones were used to pass on that information, and many bikers and Hells Angels attended all around the vicinity of the scene of Jerry's murder. In fact, one person travelling on the northbound, just immediately prior to us closing the northbound carriageway, came across and actually ripped off the patches from Jerry's jacket. I understand that those patches are always deemed the property of the club itself, and they would not want those patches to fall into the hands of anybody else.
The most important part of any outlaw motorcycle group member's attire is his patches and his leather vest that he wears.
The patches on the jacket are split into three. The top rocker, as it's known, depicts the motorcycle club. The middle badge is the emblem of that club, and the bottom badge is the area or chapter they come from. And to obtain all three patches is the ultimate goal. To become a fully patched member, you have to endure 2 years of probation. That is thought to be a tough examination of your desire to join the Angels.
That is everything they're about, it's their essence. So the attainment of the full patch is everything to that individual.
At the crime scene, there is a major breakthrough. The 48-hour fingertip search has paid off with the discovery of a significant piece of evidence.
We recovered a shell casing, a 7.65 shell casing on the motorway, which had been ejected from a semi-automatic weapon.
This looked likely to be the shell case of the fatal shot, but the ballistic examination revealed it didn't match the bullet recovered during Jerry's autopsy.
Well, it was quite unusual that the 9mm bullet that was found in Mr. Tobin was something that you'd normally see fired from a self-loading pistol. The markings from the bullet that was found in Mr. Tobin were characteristic of a revolver, more typical of a Webley Enfield revolver.
This type of gun doesn't dispense its cartridges, therefore it could not match the casing found at the murder scene.
For the cartridge case, again, we identified the calibre, and we also indicated to the police that we thought that these marks were typical of a 7.65 self-loading pistol.
The casing was linked to a hole in Jerry Tobin's mudguard, so there must have been 2 guns fired. The trajectory of the bullet also revealed that Jerry was shot at close range. The gunman must have travelled alongside him to deliver the fatal bullet. This was a major breakthrough for the detectives.
Get that little bastard! Get a bit more! Bit closer! Now!
The next was to be found on a back lane near Coventry.
The next piece of evidence that came to us was information that a car had been found burning in an area west of Coventry, in the West Midlands area. We couldn't tell the colour from the car because it had been completely burnt, but we managed to get the identifying marks from the car on the police national computer.
Once they checked the number plate against the PNC computer, It stated the car was blue, but on further investigation they found it was Caspian blue, which in bright sunlight appears green. This meant they had a positive match. They'd found the murderer's car. The police then received a tip-off about the owner of the Green Rover.
A member of the public phoned in and said there was such a car parked in Coventry, and they had seen somebody who they described as a biker type.
This vital information gave the police a name: Sean Crichton. This was the biggest breakthrough of the investigation, but the best was yet to come.
A murder hunt is underway tonight after a motorcyclist was shot dead on the
police have released
M40.
CCTV images of Jerry Tobin, the Hells Angel biker, shot
Today's
and killed on
developments
the
in the hunt
M40.
for the M40 killer. Police say they have some significant information, but still no motive. They now say 2 shots were fired from a passing Rover, which contained 2 or 3 people.
At the Harley-Davidson dealership in southeast London where he worked, there's still shock at his death. For police, the key is to find a motive.
On the 12th of August 2007, Hells Angel Jerry Tobin was murdered. With the killers still at large, investigators and police officers were racing against the clock to gather any evidence and eyewitness reports that could lead to the murderers. Vitally, they had a name: Sean Crichton.
Sean Crichton was a member of a local chapter in South Warwickshire of the Outlaws. It was becoming apparent to me then that Outlaws and Hells Angels weren't the best of friends.
So specialist covert filming teams were sent out to track down Crichton, to gather as much intelligence as possible on him and his associates.
Crichton was known to us. He was known historically. He had been involved in a number of other incidents, and we were aware of that.
The undercover police surveillance focused on the Warwickshire Outlaws, filming them without their knowledge from across the street. They were able to identify all 7 gang members, and their leader was thought to be Sean Crichton. He had an extensive criminal history dating back to 1981. His record included firearms and drug offences. He was also linked to another known criminal, Simon Turner.
And it's my opinion, based on the contact I've been able to have within that inquiry, that Simon Turner was a particularly a nasty individual who had an absolute loathing and hatred of the Hells Angels.
As the investigation continued to collect evidence on the outlaw gang, Jerry Tobin still needed to be formally identified. This grim task fell to his mother, who had travelled from Canada after hearing the tragic news.
The detectives came and drove me to the morgue to see my boy. And I'd never experienced a morgue or anything before. And he had a white sheet over him. I saw his face. And I was saying, I was touching him, and I began to talk to him, to sing to him, you know, because I knew it was my boy. I knew then there was nowhere other than to play with death, you know, other than to say to death, oh, you know, you can't have him. Can't have him, he belongs to me, you know, he's mine. So I wanted to wrap him in a cloth and carry him home, was my instincts.
Jerry was born on the 26th of March 1972 in Macclesfield, Cheshire, an only child. He moved with his parents to Canada and spent most of his youth growing up in Peace River, Alberta.
And we never had an ounce of trouble, not 1 ounce of trouble with Gerard Michael.
He He was a religious person who enjoyed giving Bible lessons at the local Sunday school. It was during this time he first got a taste for motorbikes and was often seen arriving at church on his Harley Davidson.
The very first bike he bought himself was a Harley Davidson, a special edition Harley Davidson. The Harley Davidson was and meant everything to our Jerry. There was no other bike but a Harley Davidson. I remember these times with joy, yeah, absolutely.
His mother only found out Jerry was a Hell's Angel when she heard of his death.
Of course, we were in trauma at that time, immediate trauma, along with our grief and a sudden death like that of your child. And although he was 35, he's still our kid, you know.
5 days since Jerry's murder, and the police were under extreme pressure to solve this case. International biker clubs had been violently feuding for many years, and the police feared it would spread to our shores.
The rivalry between the Hells Angels and the Outlaws on a global basis has been long-standing, and that rivalry is born out of basic, pure hatred for one another. And I would say to you that the hatred between them is palpable. You could almost cut the hatred between them. It's that bad.
The Outlaw Motorcycle Club in the UK have been actively recruiting. Their numbers are estimated to be 430 fully patched members, with 100 probationers waiting for the chance to earn their full patch.
You're talking about empires that straddle the globe, that began in the United States but now know no international borders. They try to control certain areas, and they will use any means possible in order to stake their ground, to keep their turf, and to compete with the rival gangs. And so when you get an outbreak of violence on a motorway in England, you have to see it as part of this global battle between these gangs that straddle the globe.
In the last 60 years, there have been 3,670 deaths around the world as a result of biker conflicts. Countless bombings in Australia, the United States and Canada. In Norway, a Scandinavian biker war broke out between the Hells Angels and the Banditos. This violent conflict lasted for 3 years. It left 11 dead and 96 wounded. The war ended in a truce in 1997. So far, Britain has escaped the mass bloodshed seen overseas, but the police have concerns that the violence between the motorcycle gangs could erupt and are determined not to be complacent.
This isn't just a Warwickshire issue, it's not just a British issue, it's an international issue, and what's happened is our eyes have been opened to the potential for the sort of violence we saw when Jerry Tobin was shot to happen in the future.
You may not have seen all the violence that we've seen in Canada, in North America, in Australia, and in Europe. But finally, when there's a murder, when there's a gang warfare that hits England, there is a sense, well, kind of wake up and smell the coffee. This is what biker gangs are all about.
But what triggered the violent act that killed Jerry Tobin could be closer to home. The Angels hold their Bulldog Bash at a site near Stratford-upon-Avon, which the South Warwickshire chapter of the Outlaws see as their territory. Day 6 and the investigation was moving at a rapid pace. They'd retrieved the burnt-out car. They had 2 named suspects with connections to rival biker clubs. And now, to find the evidence that would put them in the frame, CCTV became the focus of the investigation.
This footage here is at Gaydon filling station just off junction 12 of the M40.